to the Beat Sound Podcast. Come on, Beat Sound Podcast.
Welcome to the B Sound Podcast. Today we welcome James Cross, host of the Bandhive Podcast, which focuses on helping DIY artists. James is also the owner and lead engineer over at Pinnacles Pro Sound. Hi, James.
Hey, how's it going, Dan?
Good. Thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. I really appreciate the invite. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, yeah. Well, why don't we start out with letting the audience know who you are and what are you here to talk about today?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, in the past, I've described myself as a jack of all trades in the music industry, which I kind of still am in that I know a little bit about lots of different things. But over the years, having worked in live event production, touring, radio, all that kind of stuff, the thing that really is near and dear to my heart is touring and tour management. And so a couple of years ago, after not being fed up with people just asking me questions, which is kind of hitting my limit of like, I can't answer all these people who are DMing me, I said, you know what, why don't I put out a podcast and some resources for the public, and that way I can help lots of people rather than helping 5 people and being like, okay, like I got to sleep now, I'm sorry. So that's how Bandhive kind of came about, and my co-host on the Bandhive podcast, Matt Hose, he is a guy I actually met on Warped Tour back in 2014, I want to say. I think it was the first year I was out there I met him, and then we were friends the second year I was out there, and I can't remember if he's there the third year. But either way, we knew each other through Warped Tour, and I saw he was doing coaching for bands, and I was like, dude, do you want to come on my podcast with me? So he's my co-host. He's amazing. And we had another guy, Aaron Gingras, who was our co-host for about 30 episodes in the beginning, and also super cool. He was a production coordinator for some big name, like amphitheater level acts. So Bandhive is all about touring stuff. We'll talk about other things too, like things that we think artists should know, but like at its core, we're tour guys, and that's what we like talking about, and that's what we want to teach people about.
Very cool. So you said you met on the Warped Tour. Is that as a musician, or were you like running sound? Like, what did you do on the Warped Tour?
I was in sponsorship for my time on Warped Tour. Matt was in a band that was just promoting their music all day. They would grind, and oftentimes, so I don't know, you've probably been to Warped Tour, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So but just for the listeners who maybe weren't there, in the morning, in line, there's a bunch of people. And Matt was one of those guys with his band alive in Barcelona. At the time, they were called Persevering Promise. And they would go out there selling CDs and merch to people in line, just promoting their music. And they would follow literally the entire tour. And oftentimes, they would earn more money than the actual bands on the tour who were playing the smaller stages. Obviously, they're not like Black Veil Brides or Pierce the Veil or any of the main acts. But for the bands playing like Ernie Ball stage or one of the other smaller stages, Kevin Says, Hard Rock, whatever, there would be days where they would outperform those bands without actually being on the tour. So Matt knows the hustle, he knows the grind, and he and his bandmate Jesse have also worked for Falling in Reverse and other acts, tour management and merch. So neither of us actually played music on Warped Tour, but we were both there, involved in the hustle, the grind every single day. And, somewhat ironically, you see the guitars behind me. I don't consider myself a musician. I play music, but I don't earn money from playing music. So I don't call myself a musician. I call myself an audio engineer because I make money as an audio engineer. But I don't call myself a musician because I think that wouldn't be a fair title to give myself.
Wow. You know what? What a great idea to, promote yourself on a tour, even though you're not playing it. Because, when you're in a band, like, you're always promoting. Like, I always thought, like, oh, here's a good opportunity. Someone asked me about my band, I can tell them. But just to go on a tour and just be promoting your band without playing it, like, I never would have thought of that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, I didn't realize it was a thing until I did Warped Tour. And I was like, well, this actually makes sense. And it got to the point that there would be artists who would volunteer with Tada Catering, who did all the catering. And they would get all access passes for the tour in exchange for like, hey, like, you help us set up the meals. And then when you're not working, you can go to people inside the venue, which Matt wasn't one of those bands, so he wouldn't go inside unless he bought a ticket. But the bands who could go inside, they would just walk around inside all day talking to the kids at the show, being like, hey, would you listen to my music? And if you like, can you buy a seat? Like, help us pay for gas and get to the next city. Because we're on the tour, but we're volunteers. Like, we need to do this. We're just out here to promote. And it was great. You know, like, I met a bunch of those people and am still good friends with many of them, both the people on my own team that I was with in sponsorship, and as well as the people that were, you know, not exactly outsiders, but they weren't on the tour. They were still with the tour, and, you know, everybody knows them. Just the other day, Matt was telling me a story about Sully, who was the head of Warped Tour security for, I think, like 19 out of 25 years they did it. And Sully knew Matt. It's just like, Matt's not on the tour, but people still know each other. And Sully and Brian Marquis, who used to do the Acoustic Basement stage, they're now working with Billie Eilish. Brian is TMing, and Sully is, of course, doing security. So, like, just making those connections is something that I wish that still existed as a resource, because I would tell every single band, like, if you can take 2 months off and you want to earn $2,000 a day, if you do this right, go to Warped Tour, just follow the tour, you know, drink lots of Monster so you can drive overnight, have a driver, like a designated driver that sleeps during the day, and just sell your merch outside early in the morning. And it's an amazing strategy, and it's a really good way to network. I mean, I mentioned Brian Marquis. Years ago, he came and spoke at my school when I was in school, and he's talking about how the Acoustic Basement stage just started because he said to Kevin Lyman one day, like, hey, can I buy you lunch? I want to run an idea by you. So they had lunch, and he's like, hey, I want to put up a tent that has an acoustic stage in it, and we'll get some acts that are unique to the stage, and others will get, you know, like the singer of some of the main stage bands and have them do an acoustic set as well as their main stage set. And basically Kevin said, yeah, we can do that, but, you know, I'm not going to run it. Do you want to run it? And that's how Brian Marquis got the job, and that's how he ended up playing the Acoustic Basement stage every year it was out there, because he was the stage manager. So he got to, you know, I assume he got paid, but he also got to play on that stage for the work he was doing. So just making connections and then not being afraid to ask is so huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. Like, this music business is all about connections.
Yeah.
Well, really, any business, really.
Yep.
I'm kind of curious about your past a little bit more. Like, what got you on your path to where you're at today? Like, what brought you into music to begin with?
It depends on how far back you want to go. Like,
I'll go back as far as you want, man. As far as you want.
All right. So we're going to go back to the mid-1990s, like around 1996 or so, when I was 3, 4, 97, something like that. And my uncle, who lives in Germany, is a massive music fan. And aside from just appreciating all kinds of music, like mainly in the rock and hard rock genres, but he got me into an artist called Peter Maffay, who also happened to write a German kids musical. So imagine kind of like the German Bruce Springsteen writing a kids musical about a little green dragon. That's basically what this musical is about. And when I was a kid, I absolutely loved that show. I still love that show. Like, I grew up on that. You know, the nostalgia is real. And then he got me into another musical called Starlight Express. It's an Andrew Lloyd Webber show, which is only running in Bochum, which is the town where my uncle lives. Everywhere else in the world, it's shut down, but they've been in Bochum for 33 years now, I think. Am I doing that math? 1998 or 87? So like 33, 34 years. And it's different from all other musicals because they're on roller skates, and they like literally skate around the entire arena. It's specifically built for that show. So it's honestly like no other show that I've ever seen. Like, I'm not a huge theater guy. I enjoy the shows, but just like, if it's like a rock musical, that's when I'm like, okay, this is my jam. Like, it tells a story, but it has really great music. And then of course, like, what, you know, 4 or 5-year-old doesn't love trains? So a musical about trains with like people on roller skates pretending they're trains. That was just amazing. I would say stellar, but that would be too punny because it's called Starlight Express. And then just my dad too. He plays guitar a lot, just as a hobby, and he got me into bands like, or not even bands, like artists like Paul Simon or Randy Newman, Dr. John, that kind of stuff, and gave me the kind of more mellow side of things. And then I one-upped them both and was like, okay, well, you both love music. I'm going to be in music. So fast forward to 2009 or so, I started interning at a radio station here in Vermont, just a community college radio station. But I loved it, and a friend convinced me to go to school for audio engineering, because that's what I enjoyed most at the radio station. Was like, we'd have live shows and I would set them up, kind of stuff. And in between there, in that gap, I ended up running the official fan site for AFI, which led to some really cool opportunities, mainly just as a resume builder. Because like, you put AFI on your resume and people are like, whoa, you work for AFI? It's like, I mean, I run their fan site and like, I don't get paid, but like, I'm tight with their management, so like, they don't hate me. That shows I'm not some creepy fanboy stalker. Like, I know what I'm doing. And so the whole time I was in college, and through my Warped Tour years as well, I was still doing that on the side. But as I was in college, more and more, I was like, okay, I'm not the biggest fan of studio stuff. I want to be on the road. I want to be tour manager, and I want to do live sound. That's the classic, like, small to mid club level where a band doesn't have money for a crew. They're like, okay, you're the TMFOH, and then we have the merch guy who's also the driver, and that's it. Like, you're the two crew. Which now looking back, I'm like, I never could have made a career out of that. Like, I enjoy bus tours too much. But yeah, so, went through college, started doing Warped Tour. It was right before my senior year was the first time I did Warped Tour. And then did that for most of 3 summers, basically. The first and the third year, I didn't do quite the whole thing. And the third year was actually when I quit touring. I'd done some other smaller tours in between, but long story short, I met a girl in California and was like, I love touring, but I could also be home. And at this point now, I'm like, I probably should have kept touring and like taken advantage of the pre-COVID times. And, ultimately the relationship didn't work out, but we were together for 5 years and it was great, and we're still friends and all that. But I'm kind of like, I could have stayed on the road. That probably would have been more fun.
I was just going to say, you couldn't have known, though, what was coming up. So. Oh,
yeah, absolutely. And I don't regret anything that I did, really. Like, I had a great time. I got out of music for about 1.5 years, and started working a job with a nonprofit that was an absolute blast until my coworker turned out to be just like the worst person I've ever met. And, I'm sure there are worse people out there, but like, for me, this was like the worst relationship, like coworker, supervisor. She was kind of the shift lead relationship I've ever had. But out of all that, I got to intern at Signature Sound Studios in San Diego, which was amazing. That's a place where like The Used recorded there, Blink-182 recorded parts of Enema of the State. While I was there, Killswitch Engage came in to do a side project. Revolution was there while I was there. And like just back, 20 years ago when all the bands like Newfound Glory and I think they had Santana in there. I can't remember. But like a bunch of big names from both sides of the border because, San Diego being a border city. And that just revitalized my interest to be in the music industry. And so I fired Pinnacle Pro Sound back up because I'd been doing that on the side while I was touring, and got it going again. And that's when like all of a sudden the flood of questions started coming in. So towards the end of 2018, which I'm now realizing I've been doing this for almost 3 years with Bandhive, because I think it was like October or November, I started Bandhive under a different name. But we changed it to Bandhive at the end of 2020 or start of 2021, just because I wanted a more community-focused name and really wanted it to be like, it's the Hive. It's a community. Like, we're in this together as DIY artists. And the past name kind of made it sound like bands are better if they take themselves seriously, which was not the intent, but that's what I ended up realizing it was.
Oh. What was the past name, just out of curiosity?
I don't know if I'm allowed to say it.
Oh.
There were other things involved.
Okay.
I wanted to change it, and then there was a straw that broke the camel's back. But I don't know if I'm allowed to say it.
I see. Well, because I noticed you have like 90-something episodes up, right? It's like, so are those part of those episodes, or is the 90 just in the Bandhive name?
We rebranded all the episodes. The old name might be in the old episodes before, like 57, 58, something like that, between minute marker 10 and 5 minutes before the episode ends.
All right.
So if you want to find out what the old name was, you can go back and listen to the first 57 or 58 episodes of the podcast in their entirety and see if it's in there.
There's a good plug.
See if I did a good job.
Yeah.
Bandhive.rocks / podcast.
Yeah, there you go. Everybody go listen to the first 50-something episodes just so you can hear.
Oh, I can give you a hint, actually. If you go to better.band/listen, that's our like link page where you have, Spotify, Apple, all that kind of stuff. And there's just one word missing on that. I was allowed to keep that. So better.band/listen.
So speaking of your past, like you were talking about, you worked at a couple different studios and things. What I like to talk about it on here is the importance of having a mentor. And I didn't know, do you have any particular mentors that helped you along the way?
Oh, that's a good question. Right now, Brian Hood of the Six Figure Home Studio and 456 Recordings has been a huge mentor for me with Bandhive. I actually edit the Six Figure Creative podcast for him. And I've just seen like so much stuff that he does where I'm like, oh man, like I need to learn about this stuff for Bandhive. So like learning how to set up a sales funnel or an email list or all that kind of stuff, which is all really important for bands. Like back in the day, I would set up an email list and I'd send out an email. I had no idea what to put in there.
Mm-hmm.
So now seeing like, hey, this is what goes on an email list. Like this is how to write good copy. That is helping me so much to, tell bands what they need to write. Because like, you've seen it, the band that makes a super formal sounding statement about like a member departing or something like that. It's like, you have like 40 Facebook fans. Does it really need to be like, you're not writing to the masses? Like you can be real with people, and that goes a long way. Like, and what happens is, people see major artist XYZ, Taylor Swift or Justin Bieber or whatever, make this formal statement. And they try to copy that. But the thing is, those statements are not written by the band. That's why they sound like that. If the band is writing their own statements, it should sound like the band is writing it. Like it has to fit that band's brand. And the same thing goes for email. Like if you have an email list, make it sound like you. Like if it sounds like the super strict formal thing, like you're getting a letter from your bank, like that's the biggest turnoff ever for somebody who's trying to listen to a band. They're like, I want to be into the music. Like, I don't want to read a letter from my bank. I want to be like, yeah, these guys rock. Like, they have humor, personality. And a really good example of that in my mind is the Proto Men. They're an act out of Nashville. And they don't email that much, unfortunately, but they have good emails and they're just real. Like it's signed by an actual member of the band. There's like 9 people in the band, but the commander, as he's called, is like the one that signs off on it. And it's a personable, real email where they're talking like, band to you directly. And that's what people want. Like, look at anybody who's successful on Patreon. They're not writing formally. Like, they're like, hey guys, this is what I'm doing right now. Like, check this out. This is a preview that you get 2 days before everyone else. So I hope you like it. Let me know what you think. It's that super, like, informal, still polite. They're not going to, like, be dicks to anybody, but informal and just casual, friendly tone. And that goes such a long way, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, there's a thing about being authentic, right? And I know that's an overused word maybe right now, but to really be authentic, and you're trying to create emotional connection with your audience. So I think that's really important to write that way, be authentic and have that emotion there. And when Taylor Swift or somebody, their management's writing, it is no emotion. It's devoid of it.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing. Like, at Taylor Swift's level, there's so much money in it that it doesn't matter. People are going to buy it anyway because they're going to plaster everything with ads, and you're going to see like 50 Taylor Swift ads for the new album.
Mm-hmm.
before it even comes out. You know,
Yeah. You know, if you do see a Taylor Swift thing that does really well, it's like her giving something to her fans or going to her fans' house and
Right.
giving them a gift or something. And that does well because there's that emotional connection. And
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it shows that it works for that as well. And I think a lot of management companies could do better if they learned to emulate the artist's own writing. That doesn't mean they have to sound like the artist, but they have to fit that brand, you know? And that's a thing. Like, any major brand has what's called a brand voice. So, like, if you look at, you know, let's take Wendy's as an example. On Twitter, they are super sassy with people, and they'll like make jokes about other brands, and they'll make comebacks and stuff like that. Their social media team has learned how to use the Wendy's voice. So why doesn't Taylor Swift's social media team learn how to use Taylor's actual voice? Like, see how Taylor interacts with her fans and how she speaks with her fans, because those are different things. I want to point that out. How she speaks and how she interacts, like, she can interact super nicely, but speak in a different way. But if they learn those two things, then they can make Taylor Swift's posts sound like Taylor Swift wrote them. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. Taylor Swift, as much as she is a person, Taylor Swift is also a brand. Like, make no mistake, any successful artist is a brand. If you want to look at the DIY level, look at Paris with a V. When they first got on Warped Tour, they blew up. And it was because Lynn was a graphic designer herself. I don't know if she still is. But she did a lot of graphic design work. So she understood, like, hey, as we're doing this, we have to be very conscious about the visuals that we're putting out. And so that resulted in Paris, when they were, a baby band back 8-9 years ago, being very conscious about it. Everything was black and white, kind of like dark, mysterious photos and imagery. And they were working with Maddie from A Loss from Words. He was their co-manager back then. Maybe he still is. I don't know. But in my opinion, when an artist does one thing right and they do it well, you know, you can do something right and not put any effort into it. But if you do it right and you do it well and you, like, somebody sees you're putting in the effort, that's when other people want to work with you, because they say, hey, if you're taking this seriously, I can teach you how to take this other thing seriously, or give you a helping hand with it. And that's how artists get labels' attentions, managers' attentions, all that kind of stuff. So I have no doubt that Paris and their conscious choice of branding helped get them a deal with their label, with their management, all that kind of stuff. And then, so that was, 2014 their first album came out? In 2015, they hit Warped Tour. And within the first week, they were on the secondary stage. Within that first week, they got bumped to the main stage because so many people were showing up to their sets. And I feel bad for him, but Man Overboard from New Jersey, who was, just like, quote unquote, another pop punk band on Warped Tour, they didn't really have anything special going for them. They got bumped from the main stage down to the, what was it that year? The Journey stage. Yeah, Journeys was the secondary stages in 2015. And that just goes to show, like, if Man Overboard had had something special going for them, they probably would have stayed on that main stage. But Paris had all the hype because there was, like, this spark. It was these fresh young kids. They're, like, a couple years younger than I am. I'm 28. I think Lynn is, like, 25 or 26. So literally, like, 20-year-olds on Warped Tour, not even old enough to drink, and they're on the main stage. Like, that's huge. Not even Katy Perry, when she did Warped Tour in 2008, she wasn't even on the main stage, if I recall.
yeah.
It's such a difference.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. Like, no matter what you're doing as a band, it helps to do something to stand out, to differentiate yourself. Like, what makes you different? Like, figure that out and really go for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't remember the exact stat, so if this is off, my apologies. But something to the tune of 40,000 songs per week are released on Spotify.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously that's across all genres and across the globe. But that still means there's going to be a couple hundred releases or songs in your genre, because there's not nearly that many genres. There's, like, I don't know, if you want to look at the top level, like 6 or 7 genres maybe. Like, let's see. There's rock, there's rap, there's pop, there's country, there's world. That's 5. And world is basically anything that's not, like, a mainstream thing in the U.S. Like, I would say polka is world or whatever, salsa is world. But so yeah, like, rock, pop, rap, country.
EDM.
Yeah, EDM. There you go. So there's 5 plus worlds. So there's 6 basic genres, and obviously, you know, I'm a rock fan. I could probably tell you like 20 different subgenres in rock.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, a lot of times you're just splitting hairs, and there's a band that's like 3 different subgenres because they kind of do a little bit of everything. And the point being is there's so many songs out there, there's always going to be an overlap. You're never going to be the only XYZ project. And any band who thinks they have a completely original sound that sounds like no one else ever, I guarantee you it's out there. You just haven't found it.
Right.
There's a band called, I think it's Bear Ghost.
Okay.
If I'm remembering the name right. And they have really good music, and it sounds exactly like the Venetia Fair, which is a band that I really dig. They're, you know, I'm from New England. They're from the Boston area. So I asked them once, I was like, hey, you know, you guys have been around for a while. Are you fans of the Venetia Fair? They had actually never heard of the Venetia Fair before, but they said, like, you're the second or third person to say this, so we're going to check them out.
Right.
They sound exactly the same, you know, to an extent. Yeah, I can't say exactly. But they sound very similar, yet they'd never heard the Venetia Fair's music.
That's funny.
And that just goes to show, like, even without intent or without knowing something, you can sound like somebody else.
Sure.
And completely unaware until some random stranger on the internet says, hey, do you know this band? Because you sound a lot like them.
You're right. Well, you know, and as an audio engineer, it's like sometimes I work with songwriters or whatever, and they'll write something and be like, oh, does that sound too much like this band? And it's like, who cares? Just, you know, you came up with it. It's your thing. So go ahead and do it. And
yeah, as long as it's not like the exact melody and lyrics, you know, as long as you're not going to get sued, do whatever. Like, do what feels natural.
Yeah, I agree. But that's just one of those little things that you come across. You know, because I'm kind of a prolific songwriter myself, and people come to me for that kind of stuff all the time. And I'm always like, I've had people point out some stuff I've done and been like, hey, that sounds like, you know, this song I heard from Beck or something. And it's like, well, yeah, it might. I guess it kind of does, but so what? Like, Beck doesn't care.
I want to say something here, and
yeah,
you may know this already, but if any client ever says that to you again, just show them 4 Chords by Axis of Awesome, the Australian comedy band.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, a chord progression cannot be copyrighted. Like, you cannot say, I own this chord progression. Otherwise, there would be no music, because every chord progression ever has been done before.
Mm-hmm.
But you can copyright melody and lyrics, and that's what makes a song original.
Right.
Axis of Awesome. If somebody sounds like, oh, hey, that's the same chords, like with the same strumming pattern, that sounds almost the same. It's like, yeah, but you do realize that every single pop song ever is the same way. Like, here's proof.
Right.
I have the receipts.
Yeah. Yeah. And even those lines are getting blurred, because I don't know how many songs I've heard in recent years where it's like they'll just straight up steal a hook off another song using the same lyrics and stuff. I don't know the legalities of that, but a lot of times it'll be maybe public domain songs too, where...
Yeah, exactly. Now, I really wish I had a specific Robin Thicke example of like some stolen lyrics or melodies or something, just because he said blurred lines, but I can't think of one right now.
Yeah, man, I noticed you're into the puns, and I really dig that about your podcast. You guys seem to always start out with some puns, right?
Yeah, there was a drought for Matt missed about 10 episodes just because he was in the studio and like crazy stuff going on, and had to go be with his band because his band's in a different state. And so there was like a dry spell where I just had guests just like, how are they going to handle the puns? Like, are they going to hate me if I just bounce a pun off their head? And like, so I didn't do puns for about 10 episodes. But then when Matt was back, okay, it's time for the puns.
Did they just come flooding out after that?
Yeah, it definitely was. It was brutal. I feel bad for Matt.
I think puns are fun. You know, just as an aside, it's like when I was in a touring band, like me and my guitar player buddy, we would just do puns back and forth, just trying to make each other groan as much as possible. And anybody who around us was a casualty of that, like, too bad, you know?
Yeah, it's a good Boston punk band too. So,
what is the puns?
The Casualties.
Oh, the Casualties. Okay, the puns isn't a bad, you know, punk name either, but
yeah, the puns without the K.
Nice.
Pun rock. See, there's a new genre that's probably been done on Spotify. Pun rock.
Pun rock. All the lyrics are just puns.
Yeah. Well, and there you go. The Pizza Underground. Macaulay Culkin did the Velvet Underground, but pizza themed. It's been done. I don't know if they were puns, but they were about pizza. So, pizza rock. I don't know.
So, not to like segue into anything, but right before this, you were telling me about a new product you had, and I kind of wanted to bring that up. That like I know you have the Submithub course. Right. And I actually went through that and got a couple emails from you and stuff. And I think there's some valuable info in there.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that first, and then we'll get into your new product if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure thing. So basically with Submithub, I've been a blogger on Submithub for almost 5 years. I joined just after the site turned 1 back in, I want to say it was like October, November 2016 is when I hopped on board, and they were founded at the end of And so over the years, I've seen a lot of artists do exactly what they shouldn't do, and I know what my pet peeves as a curator are. And there's a blogger's chat or a curator's chat with all the other like Spotify playlisters and the YouTubers and all that kind of stuff. So I know a little bit of what everyone's pet peeves are for when artists are submitting on Submithub. And I've also done my own submissions for clients on Submithub. So eventually I was like, you know what? This needs to be a course. So in the Bandhive community, which we have a Facebook group, you can go to Bandhive.rocks/group if you want to join it. That'll take you right to the Facebook group. I was like, hey, like I want to do a free Submithub campaign for someone in exchange. Like you let me use the information that I get from this, like the exact specific statistics for your song and that kind of stuff in a course. And so my friend Rustin said, yeah, let's do it. He's in a band called Real Talk. And let's see, I think the song was called Spent that I used. And I got it to, the way I do it is I typically do 10 submissions at a time, give or maybe 8, maybe 11, who knows. But in the first 10 or so submissions, I had like an 84% approval rate for his song. So I was like, okay, like I'm definitely on to something. And, there were strategies involved in there. And what I'll say is it involves a lot of careful selection. Most artists go on Submithub, they buy like 50 or 100 credits or whatever large amount, and they just submit to everyone. And it's like that works, you can do that. But then, of course, you're not going to get approved by everyone. Like, if you're complaining about a 5% approval rate, don't look at all the people who declined you. Look at the people who approved you and find more people like that. You probably either... I hate to say it, but there's two options if you have a 5% approval rate. Either 1, you submitted to the wrong people, or 2, your song really sucks. Like
right.
it could be the song, it could be the production. Like I've heard people with great songs and terrible production. It just all depends. And you have to keep in mind that, somebody on a Spotify playlist, if they have like all the biggest names in rock and then they have some Submithub artists, they're going to pick the Submithub artists that sound like those artists, like the big name, the rock bands. So if your song sounds like it was recorded on an iPhone and it's like just a basic GarageBand demo, they're not going to toss it on that playlist because as soon as they do, people are either going to just skip the song, and then after they hear it enough times on that playlist, they're going to unfollow the playlist, which means then that curator is losing people, which means they're not going to be a curator much longer. That's the whole point of a curator, is they put the best stuff, in their opinion, because music is subjective, out there. So that's basically a very roundabout way of describing my strategy. If somebody wants to go get it, you can go to Bandhive.rocks If somebody wants to go get it, you can go to Bandhive.rocks/Submithub. It's a free email course over, I think, like 5, 6, 7 parts, something like that. Just designed to basically give you a bite-sized piece of information and then an action step. And there are other Submithub courses out there. I wouldn't even call them courses, really, like guides, videos, blog posts, that kind of stuff. And those are great. But almost every single one that I've seen, all of them that I know of, are just like a step 1, step 2, step 3, how to do this. And that's what I didn't want to do. I wanted to do like, yes, how to do this, but also why. Because so many of those other videos say, oh, do this. It's like, well, I see most artists not doing that. Why don't they do that? Oh, because no one told them that that's super important, because curators are going to like hate them if they don't. We're not judgmental. We're not your enemy as curators. Like, we're not going to hate you for doing anything. But for example, one massive thing that I've seen more and more artists doing lately is they get approved, and then I ask them for information, and they just don't reply. And so after a few days, Submithub has a feature where I can request an update, and then the artist has 3 days to reply, and if they don't, I get to keep their money, but I don't have to share the song. Which sounds bad, but it's like, I don't want 100 songs in my queue that just are sitting there. I can't do anything with them because I don't have the signed copyright permission to upload them. But the artist doesn't get back to me, so like I just have to leave them sitting there. No, like, I'm sorry, but I'm not gonna let that sit there indefinitely. So one thing that I will say on the podcast right now is, Submithub artists, if you're submitting there, check your messages daily. Reply to your messages daily. If you don't know what a curator is asking for, don't just ghost them. Ask them to clarify. Like, you're complaining about not getting approved by enough people, and then when you do get approved, you don't actually do anything to follow through. Like, if you want to get shared, the work doesn't stop when you get approved. You have to follow through with it and make sure that it happens. And just to point out that it's fair, if a curator doesn't respond to an artist, the artist can do the same thing and request an update, and the curator has 72 hours to respond. So like it goes both ways. Don't get me wrong. There are curators who will ghost, but I think in my 5 years on Submithub, somebody's requested an update once, and I've sent out like 5 in the last month just because artists aren't replying when I ask them for information, or like they don't have the song file. And I'm like, dude, can you send me the song file? So stuff like that. It's brutal.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
I've submitted some songs to Submithub with my own work. And I'm curious what you think about this tactic as a curator. I wanted to squeeze every last drop out of my money that I spent there. So what I did was, all the people who rejected me and they said why they rejected me, I used that in my social media and said, hey, this is who it's not for. This is the people who won't like my music. And I used that, and I actually got a fairly good response from that. You know, like, there were some people who were like, oh, how dare they diss you like this or whatever. And it's like, I don't see it as a diss. I just see it as like a, hey, people who, somebody said, oh, this sounds like Rob Zombie and I hate Rob Zombie. It's like, well, somebody might like Rob Zombie, so I'll put that out there for, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So do you think that's a good tactic, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I obviously wouldn't call out the curators in a bad way, but it doesn't sound like that's what you're doing. It sounds like you're doing it in a constructive way, like a friendly way.
Mm-hmm.
You're not, because I've seen artists go on social media and be like, oh, so-and-so from this magazine is such a jerk, like they hate my music. It's like, okay, that's not what they said. Like, you're
Right.
reading into it. And that goes back to, insecurity. Like, many times I notice on Submithub that the artists who are most willing to take feedback in a constructive manner are the ones who are better artists. They have more confidence because they know, like, hey, we have a good song, we have good production, and they're more receptive to taking constructive criticism on board. Or just like, hey, this is great, but it's a little too country pop for us. We do more like modern rock stuff. Sorry,
Yeah.
So I do notice a trend that artists, the more confident they are in themselves, the more likely they are to react well to rejection, which totally makes sense going into psychology. It's another rabbit hole. But yeah, that's a great idea. I've also seen artists just lift quotes from feedback, because a lot of times curators will say something good about it and then something bad and then something else that's good. So they'll just, if the curator says, oh, hey, I really love the vocals and the arrangement of the piece, but blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
They'll take that snippet and be like, RMP magazine said they really love the vocals and the arrangement, and they'll quote it.
Mm-hmm.
That's great and totally encouraged. Like, Submithub has said, yeah, you're paying for that feedback, so there's no reason not to use that. It's a great idea.
Well, yeah. I just thought that would be like a cool little bonus piece of information for anybody who was looking for that kind of thing.
I might have to go update the email course now. Now, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
When you go on Submithub, what approval rates do you typically see?
Well, I've only used it for one song so far, and I think I had about a 25%.
Okay. So that's better than the site average. The site average for premium submissions is 21, 22. It fluctuates a little bit. But so at 25%, you're already ahead of the average.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, it's
That makes me feel better.
and keep in mind that's still 1 in 4 people. Like if you walk up to somebody on the street and say like, "Hey, well, did you listen to my music?" You're not going to get 1 in 4 people to be like, "Yeah, I'll listen." No way. So 25%, yeah, that sounds low, but that's actually not that bad.
Right. I think you're doing good if you're like 1 in 10. I think is the kind of ideal thing. Something like that.
I mean that would be 10%. That would be a little low in my opinion. Like so for me personally, when I do a campaign for an artist, I do, like I was saying, batches of 10.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't get like the 50 to 60% mark in that first 10, where I've been like super careful and painstaking with finding the exact right curators, I just say to them like, "Hey, I don't think this is the song. Like, if you want to try a different song, we can try a different song, but I would not put more money behind this one on Submithub." That doesn't mean it won't do well elsewhere, because Submithub is one tool in your tool belt, but this is not the song for Submithub. But if we hit that 50, 60%, then I'll say, "Hey, if you want to keep going, let's do another batch of 10 or maybe 20, and we'll just keep expanding our reach on Submithub until we start seeing it drop to like 20, 30%. And that way you still get a large amount of curators, but you don't waste your money up front spending money on like 80 curators when only 10 of them would have been good."
Yeah, that makes sense. So what about this new thing that you sent me today? I was kind of going over that a minute ago, and before we start talking.
Yeah, sure.
It sounds like you're pretty excited about it. I mean, it's new, so it's like you might as well. I'd
I'm
like to hear more
stoked.
about it. Yeah.
It's new, like you said, but it's also very old. I actually built it starting about 9 years ago, and for every tour that I've done, for every band I've helped out with their tour, even if I wasn't on the road with them, I was just like helping them crunch numbers and that kind of stuff. I've always updated it and made it easier to use to the point where it is now almost completely automatic. Basically, you put data in and it spits data out. You don't have to do any math. It's like the easiest thing you can find. And it's for the most boring subject ever, unless you're me and you love spreadsheets. It's called the Bandhive Puresheet. And it's just a budget for DIY bands. That's all it is, specifically for tours. And this comes about, I love referring to this story, but about 5 years ago, I did a weekender tour for a friend's band. They were missing a bass player who was not a little ironically at basic training. The joke for that whole tour was he didn't understand what basic training was, and he got a bad surprise when he got there.
Oh, wow.
He knew what he was getting into. But anyway, that is... So I said, "Yeah, I'll fill in on bass, but you're going to have to hire me to tour manage you too, because that's what I do. Like, I'll play bass for free, but I'm going to tour manage." So they agreed, and I did that little weekender tour. It was 3 shows over 5 days, and I will never forget, at the end of the last show, I crunched all the numbers as we're in the van on the way home, got gas one final time, and I was like, "Okay, so here's our profit and loss, and you guys earned like $27 or $28, not a lot."
Yeah.
And the guitarist said, "Whoa, we made money? We've never earned money on a tour before." I'm like, "Oh, well, how much do you normally lose?" He goes, "I don't know. We've also never really tracked that before." So I just said, "Well, you might have earned money on a tour before. You just don't know it." And that's the thing. Like, having a budget is so important because, one, you know if you're going to go into crazy credit card debt beforehand, and two, you have, like a goalpost to reach. So if you stay within your budget, like, hey, this is the most we're going to spend if everything goes right. Let's try and spend less than that while still doing everything we need for a successful tour. And so the Bandhive Tour Sheet, I don't want to call it a tour management app, but it's like a very DIY tour management. Because what you do is you put in your starting date, just one date, and it populates all the dates. And then for each date, you put in the venue, the city, whether it's an off day, all that kind of information, the mileage from one city to the next. It automatically spits out a fuel calculation. All you have to do is put in your miles per gallon and the gas price for each city. So it'll tell you like how much you're going to spend on gas each day plus a 10% surplus, which is variable. If you don't want 10%, like there's an easy field to change 25 or 0, which would be not a great idea, but I mean, you can do it. If you don't want to have a surplus, you can do that. And then that fuel data gets pulled into the estimated daily budget tab automatically, and that's where you fill in all your other categories like promotion, meals, hotels, if you want to be cushy and live in a hotel while you're on the road, vehicle expenses that aren't fuel, so like oil change or new wipers, or, you know, you crashed and you need to rent a van, like all that kind of stuff. And then just like, I forget, there's like 8 or 9 different categories of expenses, including miscellaneous for anything that comes up. But basically, it gives you a framework to just punch in all these numbers, and it tallies everything up for you. And then as you're on tour, every time you have an expense, you log it in the expense log, and it shows up automatically on the actual daily budgets tab, which looks identical to the estimates, except that it's just based on your actual expenses. And then at the bottom of it, there's a thing that's like, hey, at the end of the tour, you were over budget, you were under budget, you hit the budget. Like, it'll show you. And so it's a really great way to, one, keep track of all your finances, which is the main idea. It is first and foremost a budgeting app. But two, it's like a basic calendar or itinerary. So for a DIY band, there's this app called Master Tour that everyone in the industry uses. Like, you know, any artist doing this on a professional level at like the large club level to the amphitheater or arena level, they're most likely using Master Tour. It's a great app. Like, I highly recommend it. But it's way more powerful than most DIY artists need, and it's $65 a month. So it's like ridiculously pricey for a DIY band. And I recognize that like spreadsheets are great. Most people have no idea how to set up a spreadsheet the right way and are going to, you know, like put the labels in and put stuff in and then like put it in and then, you know, add their data and then be like, okay, what do I do now?
Yeah.
You know, you don't have the handy formulas. You have to enter everything like 3 times because you have to put it on every single tab if you have different tabs. Most people probably don't have different tabs at that point. They're just like, here's one sheet with everything, and it's like, you know, a spaghetti. So I'm like, I can put this out. And it is a product. It's the first Bandhive product. It's not free. I will warn you now, but I think it's totally worth it. As of right now, it's $27. It might go up later. It probably will go up. I'm going to constantly be adding to it. I've been updating it whenever I use it for 9 years. So anyone who buys it now, there's going to be updates as long as I'm using it in the future. And that includes like if people email me and say, hey, like this would be really handy and I can do it, I will add it and you'll have access to that change. So if anybody's interested in that, like you can tell how much I'm nerding out about it and how excited I am. You can go to bandhive.rocks/toursheet. That's just one word, TOURSHEET, to pick that up. And it has a 30-day money-back guarantee. So I know numbers aren't sexy, but if anyone wants to take a band seriously on the road, like you need to do this. Like you need to know if it's going to cost you $8,000 to hit the road, because that way you can say like, okay, you know, we're expecting to earn $2,000. There's 4 of us, or let's make it easy because I'm bad at math in my head. Let's say there's 3 of us. $8,000 in estimated expenses minus the $2,000 in income. That means we're going to be $6,000 in the hole. And there's 3 of us, so that means each of us has to pony up $2,000 if we want to do this tour. Like, if you know that in advance and you recognize that, it's totally achievable.
Right.
But if at the end of the tour, all of a sudden you're like, guys, like, where did all our money go? Like, who's going to pay us back? That's brutal. So don't be that. Like, spend $27 now, and it will save you so much money in the long run. Like, or if you have $65 a month, by all means, go for Master Tour. But just keep in mind that's going to be like what, $650 plus $130, $780 a year that you could be putting into Submithub credits or Facebook ads or like anything. You could hire Dan to record. I don't know how far $780 would take anyone with you, Dan, but $780 is still a chunk of money.
It is, yeah.
Let's say 780 minus 27, you're looking at 753. So there's a $753 difference just in the first year, and this Puresheet, you'll have it forever. So yeah, I'm nerding out, and I'm being that guy who pitches incessantly, but Bandhive.rocks/Puresheet is where to get it.
One of the things that seems like it might help with too is just thinking ahead about some of the expenses you might not even think about. And you're putting your years of experience behind that and showing like, hey, here's some stuff that you might not even have thought about that you're probably going to need.
Yeah, definitely. And it's still growing. Like, all the tours I've done have been, aside from Warped Tour, but like the DIY tours I've done have always been like, like the venues in the suburbs, you don't have to worry about parking, that kind of stuff. My co-host Matt the other day was looking at it because I said, hey, I want your feedback. You tour as well. Like, what do you think? And he looked at it and said, dude, there needs to be parking on here. Like, if you're playing a major city, you're going to have $30-$40 in parking every single day just for your van. I'm like, boom, done. Parking is now in there as a separate category. Like all that kind of stuff. So it is a living and breathing document. Every time somebody mentions something to me, as long as it's something that's like really important, it gets added. I can't even remember what you were saying, and that got me on this tangent. But
it's okay.
You were saying that it might spark some ideas of the artists for things that they didn't think about, and that's literally the idea. Is like make it so the artist can focus on making music. They just punch in the numbers and the sheet does all the math for them, and they can then make the decision based on that, rather than saying like, we don't know what we're doing. How do we do this? Like, and I could even see like small-time tour managers at the small club level using this. It's obviously going to need some modifications for them. It's really made for a DIY band. But at the same time, like, I've used it on like all the smaller tours I've done, and it's been super useful.
Yeah. Does it have like a miscellaneous thing that you can plug in? I mean, does it have like a thing for miscellaneous expenses or whatever?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So like if your drummer punches through his kick drum head or something, you can be like, yeah, this is coming out of the band budget.
Right.
And it's really, to be honest, it's DIY to the point that it almost assumes that the band is not covering the essential expenses for like instrument repair or upkeep, that kind of stuff, where like, hey, the guitarist is buying their own strings.
Right.
It's that DIY. That's not to say, like, if somebody says they want an instrument upkeep category, I can add one. Like, somebody else could add one too, but it's going to be easier since I know all the back end stuff for me to do it. And like, basically the possibilities are endless with it. I just, once I know what other people want, because again, like, I've been using this for almost a decade. No one else has been using this yet. So once I see what other people want, it will reflect that.
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, like you said, it sounds like it's a living, breathing application. So
yeah.
With like 95 podcasts under your belt, is there any kind of podcasting you can give me, because I'm new to it?
Just stick to a rhythm. So this is going to be a little bit of a story. We launched our podcast specifically for touring artists on December 17th, whatever the Tuesday was, of around December 17th in 2019. And we had pre-recorded 10 episodes, and we were still that far ahead when in March 2020, I flew over to Germany for my grandma's 93rd birthday. On her birthday, they decided to close the borders. So here we were. The international touring world was shutting down right around that time, and we had 10 episodes in the bank, all or almost all related to touring. Talk about terrible timing. So I got home, and we did not record an episode until mid to late April. We basically went a month and a half, almost 2 months without recording. But we've picked up. We have not missed a single week since December 2019. So get as much content as possible. I get really nervous if I don't have like 3 to 4 episodes in advance recorded. So get as much content as possible. So that way, if you need to, you can take a couple weeks off and be like, hey, mental health break. I'm taking a vacation. The world's on fire. Like, who knows? But that stuff is still scheduled and going out as it should. And then, be consistent. And, above all, like, recognizing yourself. Like, for me, I get stressed if I don't have things planned out 5 steps in advance. That's probably why I like tour management. I like to plan things out. I like logistics and that kind of stuff. Which, actually, that's funny. That tour sheet, I moved cross-country 3 years ago. I used that tour sheet to move cross-country. So you don't have to be a band on tour. You can literally use that tour sheet if you're planning out, like, your Airbnbs in different cities and your gas expenses and all that kind of stuff. I came in under budget. So that's just me. I went to the extent of planning a tour to move across.
Thanks, Puresheet.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, just be consistent with it. Put stuff out there, and recognize when you need a break. And then if you've been consistent with recording, you'll be able to take a break when you need it.
Right on. That's good advice too, because I was doing like 2 or 3 ahead, and then I like ran dry for a couple weeks trying to find people. And I ended up missing a week, and it was stressful. So
yeah, that's brutal. And I have to say I'm lucky in that I have a co-host, so we don't have to have guests. I can just be like, Matt and I Monday morning. He's in Colorado, I'm in Vermont. So for me, 9:30. For him, 7:30. And it's just like, okay, what's up, Matt? Let's start this week, and we knock out an episode. Lately, we've been doing 2 just because we fell behind. Like, we didn't miss an episode, but it was to the point where it's like, hey, the episode we're recording now comes out in a week and a half.
Mm-hmm.
You know the feeling. That was stressful.
Yeah.
So a couple of times we're just like, hey, this is a quick episode. Let's do a second one. Boom. And we knocked out a second one. We did that 2 or 3 weeks in a row. And now we're, I don't know, like, I think 3 weeks ahead, not counting yesterday. So like the next Tuesdays, because we're recording this on a Wednesday. And it's just a relief to get back up there. And ideally, I want to get up to like 6. I don't want to get to 10 again, because then if there is a major change, that's just going to throw a wrench in the works.
Yeah. So it's keeping a balance then, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Where can people find you online?
You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at MadRockXVX, or just search for James Cross. There's like hundreds of James Crosses, but MadRockXVX is the easier way. And then our website is Bandhive.rocks. That's ROCKS instead of com, just because Bandhive.com was $3,000. So I was like, yeah, we can do without that for the time being.
Yeah.
And I like the name. Like, it fits our brand. It fits our personality, our community. And then we're also Bandhive.rocks on Instagram. And then last but not least, the community I mentioned earlier. If you go to bandhive.rocks/group, that'll send you to our Facebook community. We've got almost 600 people in there who are all DIY artists or DIY creatives trying to learn from one another and share each other's tips. So I definitely encourage anyone who wants to have a community of like-minded musicians to join us there. Or, of course, you can do it the old school way and search for Bandhive on Facebook. Just make sure you go to the group, not the page. I've seen a few people like the page, and then I message them like, hey, like, I think you were looking for the group. Like, join us here. You can like the page too. That's not a problem. But like, if you're looking for the group, make sure you find the group.
Is the group pretty active?
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool.
We have posts in there almost every day.
Nice. I'll have to get on there.
Yeah, look forward to it.
Cool. Yeah, and then I'll also put some of the most pertinent links in the description.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on and everything. I really appreciate you being here.
Oh, my pleasure, man. This was a blast. I really had fun. Thank you. And just I want to point out on the show, I said this before we recorded, but it's super cool to have the band Hive be on the B Sound podcast. Our logo is a little bee, so it's super fitting. And it's been pointed out to me that bees don't have stripes, so technically it's a wasp, but I mean, it's a bee. That's
That's fair. That's fair.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you so much.